Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, August 29th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Bloomberg and Morning Consult releasing a new set of battleground state polls in 7 battleground states for this November election. Today they released a set of polls across Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, battleground states that are so important in this upcoming November's race. 7 states that the Harris campaign, the Trump campaign have been focusing on relentlessly, with Kamala Harris doing a swing states tour across all 7 states today, campaigning in Savannah, Georgia. The Trump team focusing on the same 7 states, expanding their map a little bit further than what they had focused on in 2020 rather, but narrowing a bit up from where they were in early 2024 when they were up in the race against President Joe Biden. Now, you might remember that I covered the Bloomberg Morning Consult polls done back in late July after Kamala Harris had practically been determined to be the future Democratic nominee for President of the United States. Now, this is an article from July 30th, and we covered it because it was really important. It showed that in the majority of battleground states and the overall spread, Kamala Harris had the advantage, enough electoral votes to get her to 270 plus. It put her in a really strong position for the November election, but the lead, pretty much the main headline here, was that she wiped out Donald Trump's swing state lead. And that mattered because at that point in time, it was looking at the 2024 race, and they were looking at the Biden versus Trump matchup and comparing it to that of Harris versus Trump, in which she saw tremendous growth as a candidate, even in comparison to some of the hypothetical polls that people had used to weigh her candidacy against Donald Trump in the aftermath of the presidential debate. But again, it was the major headline here that she wiped out his lead. And again, that cannot be understated that this was a very impressive feat. But even more impressive today, she is now declared the victor in these early preliminary polls, again, 2 months out from the election, in 6 out of the 7 battleground states for this November. It's one thing to take down Donald Trump's lead and make it a tie, or take it from being a 6-point lead to a 1-point lead. Narrowing up a race is always commendable when you have time before November. But it is clear Kamala Harris's campaign not only recognizes that the time is very sacred, but is using it to maximize the growth of her candidacy, going from a point where on the day she announced that she was in office, going to be running for president of the United States, had a record low approval to now a record high approval in the past 3.5 years. And looking at the new set of polls out of Bloomberg and Morning Consult, you can see them here. The advantages that Kamala Harris now gives to the Democratic Party is quite tremendous. She's up 2 in North Carolina, 2 in Georgia, 3 in Michigan, 4 in Nevada, 4 in Pennsylvania, and a whopping 8 percentage points in the state of Wisconsin. This race is starting to feel more and more like 2020 and potentially even better now that North Carolina is showing the Democratic Party in a position where they are in the advantage in the state. The only thing that can be seen as a negative and really a massive improvement in comparison to that of President Joe Biden is that Arizona is a tie between Trump and Harris, but beyond that, Donald Trump leads in 0 states. Not even Arizona, obviously a tie is not a lead, leads in 0 battleground states. Kamala Harris wins in over 80% of them. And so when you're taking a look, too, at the trajectory of Kamala Harris against Donald Trump, you can actually see the comparison point. They were graceful enough to provide us this graphic here that they showed on their article of all the swing states and all the battleground states from earlier on in March and April with Biden and Trump. You can see the track here from March to April to June to July has now tremendously improved for the Democratic Party. You can take a look back in April and May, and let's go back to July because I think that's the most important point for us when looking at the election. When July, right before Joe Biden dropped out of the race, weeks before, just a week before actually, Bloomberg Morning Consult did a set of battleground state polls that in July showed in Arizona, Biden was down a few points. In Georgia, Biden was down. In Michigan, we saw Biden do a little bit better, expand his lead, but again, be in a position where that was the only state he was doing well in. In Nevada, he was down. He was down in North Carolina. Wisconsin was showing some good results, but in Pennsylvania, Biden was down 6-7 points in that state. Regardless of what metric you're looking at, though, Kamala Harris has overall improved the overall number at the top, right? 49% with the exception of Arizona, which is the only state she does not have a lead in. And when it comes down to these states, she's now clearing majority numbers in Wisconsin, clearing majority numbers in Pennsylvania, and just a point off from clearing the majority in Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, and 2 points off of clearing that majority in Arizona. which means that a majority, again, is that point where we say, no matter what Donald Trump does in winning those undecideds, when you're at 51 and your other opponent is at 39, even if they win 100% of the undecideds, the simple math tells us there's not enough outstanding vote for your candidate, you as a person, to lose that race. And so when you're taking a look at these battleground states, it's sort of like a similar dilemma. We're sure Kamala Harris might be in a position where she's only up 4 in Pennsylvania, and it could be as little as a 2-point lead. But in the Electoral College, a victory is a victory. We don't do things by proportion outside of Nebraska and Maine. We don't do things half a point victory being less of an Electoral College victory than that of a 90-point victory. It doesn't matter. Because of this winner-take-all Electoral College system, Kamala Harris being at over 50% of Pennsylvania and Wisconsin is enough for us to say that there is no reason to believe Donald Trump will win the state if these polls are entirely 100% accurate. But we know they aren't. And so when we look at data points like this, I want you to understand that this is all in the context of a broader general election season. Absolutely, the numbers have been far better for Kamala Harris, and we are seeing consistently, pre, current, and post-Democratic convention, that Kamala Harris is doing well nationally, especially in comparison to that of President Biden. But in a few weeks from now, we need to stop talking about Biden because it doesn't really matter, because it is all about a Harris versus Trump race. I'm interested to see what these swing state numbers will look like after the first presidential debate. This is a very short campaign period, less than 150 days of a Harris versus Trump matchup, and it's showing that our battleground states are positively responding to that of Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. It is showing us that voters in these states are watching the ads, are tuning in, and are changing their minds as to where they were, and even the Bloomberg Morning Consult polls show us that minds are changing. That while Biden might have had strong performances in Wisconsin and Michigan in comparison to other states, he was still losing 5 out of the 7. Donald Trump, back earlier on in April, was leading in 7 out of the 7 battleground states, 6 out of the 7, with the exception of Michigan, which just so happened out of all of these battleground states ended up being the most pro-Biden state in 2020. So for it to be the most pro-Biden again in 2024 isn't that shocking. At the end of the day, Donald Trump led it in 6 out of the 7 4 months ago. Today, Kamala Harris leads in 6 out of the 7, and in her worst performance is tied. That alone shows us just how much this race has changed. And you can even look. On the national level, on the day Biden dropped out of the race, Trump led by 3. Today, Kamala Harris leads by 3, on the verge of 4 points. A net 6 to 7 point national shift in favor of Vice President Harris. In fact, a 7-point shift because it would be a 6.6% swing, which rounds up to 7. It's a massive change in the trajectory of the race. And again, it's because while Donald Trump has largely been seen as unfavorably as he always has been, Kamala Harris has completely rebounded the way that Americans view her. Take a look at this skyrocket on overall net approval. Very good for Kamala Harris. When you look at the national data points, very good for Kamala Harris. When you look at the forecast, very strong for Kamala Harris. And I get it. This entire race largely has been about a point of comparison. But what we see in the Bloomberg Morning Consult polls extends beyond even what we see in terms of just Kamala Harris doing better than Trump because people like her better. It's more about the fact that she's now inspiring the base and clearing majorities in states, again, like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and getting very close to doing so in Georgia, in Michigan, in Nevada, and North Carolina. And if Bloomberg Morning Consult's polls are correct, which I'm not saying they are the gold standard, I do not believe that we should be looking at this and saying this is the only poll analysis we should take into consideration. But it speaks again to this larger, more cohesive point that I've been making for a month now, and that is that Kamala Harris has made improvements, and massive ones at that, and now we're starting to see, again, data point after data point. What did I say just 2 days ago, 3 days ago, talking about the approval polls, is that we are now on track to potentially see pretty consistently Kamala Harris do far better than she ever had before, where even now the 4 recent polls when it comes down to her favorability rating are net positive, and there's a few interspersed. Echelon Insights, Kaplan Strategies, Morning Consult, showing that net favorable approval. That can lead Kamala Harris to being in the net favored approval compared to where she was before. We can also see it too on these national networks. We can see it in the head-to-head data. But again, going back to that point about what it would look like. Again, an 8-point lead in Wisconsin would make it likely blue. A 4-point lead in Pennsylvania would make it lean blue. A lead in Michigan of 3 points is lean. Nevada would be lean. Move it out of that tilt column. Good for Democrats. Georgia, we would see Arizona rather would be a tie. Georgia would be narrowly in favor of Kamala Harris. We're seeing 2 points there. That's that's lean. And North Carolina would also be a lean margin. And why would this matter for Democrats here? It leaves substantive room for growth in comparison to the 2020 electoral map. Because if you throw in Arizona, and I'm telling you now, if Kamala Harris is winning 6 out of the 7 battleground states, including North Carolina, she's winning Arizona. Would mean an electoral map like this, based on, again, those metrics from Bloomberg and Morning Consult, this is the likeliest electoral college map, 319 to 219. It's not my election prediction. It's not where I'm at when it comes down to predicting this race, but this is what we can visualize in looking at the polls, what we are on track to see should these polling numbers stand correct. And so when I understand the 2024 race and I understand all of these different polling metrics that come into account, I think about the Bloomberg and Morning Consult data points that show Kamala Harris doing this well. Again, I don't think she wins 6 out of the 7 today. My own electoral college map that I released 2 weeks ago shows her losing states that are currently characterized as blue right now, states like North Carolina and states like Georgia. But I see an argument to believing that Kamala Harris is now trending these states in the right direction. Do I think she wins Wisconsin by 8? Absolutely not. But the fact is, Biden was up by 2, she's up by 8. And a 6-point swing amongst the same electorate matters. When you take a look at the data points in Michigan and Pennsylvania, improvement matters. It may not predict the overall margin 100% right. It might, because we don't know how these elections work when it comes down to polling fluctuations. In 2022, we saw that some cases, Morning Consult was right. Some cases, Emerson was right. Some cases, it was wrong. At the end of the day, I am most interested in, amongst the same people polled, amongst the same groups and same types of people, in the same methodology, in the same polling firm, showing improvement for Kamala Harris pretty consistently. That's what I take away from this, because that's what we should be taking away from these polls. Not that Kamala Harris is on track for this massive electoral college landslide. That's why all my even any conversation or discussion around a landslide would be purely and is purely hypothetical, but it does provide a unique perspective to look at this election. And when it comes down to understanding and analyzing polls, I agree very similarly in that all of this should be taken in context, and none of it should be taken as the gold standard or as the blueprint in predicting this election as the end-all be-all. And so when I take a step back and I look at this from hopefully an objective lens, it is that Kamala Harris is in a position where she has room to grow, but she's already clearing very important benchmarks for national Democrats. And it means that this 2024 cycle could be a really strong one for that of Vice President Harris. We aren't in a position again where we're seeing 2020 numbers. I'm really not seeing that. But what I am seeing is a winning campaign. It is a winning campaign, and a campaign that I did not see winning a month and a half ago. That's good news for national Democrats. But we still have 68 days to go. There is a lot that can change. 2 presidential debates, 1 vice presidential debate, numerous rallies, countless events, so many different social media exchanges, so many different speeches, a lot that is going to happen that can genuinely just completely change the way that one campaign is going. But a general thing I've started to notice too over the past week and a half, really over the past month and a half, since the convention, but even before then, it is that Donald Trump's campaign really doesn't know how to treat Kamala Harris's candidacy as a serious one. Because they came into Joe Biden's believing this election would be a slam dunk, that it was no longer about whether they'd win, but rather what the margin would be, the margin of victory, when I say that margin. But now they're in for a very competitive race, and it has become very clear that people like J.D. Vance were not the right pick for vice president, that being surrounded by members of the Project 2025 Advisory Council was not the right idea. The Trump campaign doesn't know how to characterize or paint Kamala Harris or Tim Walz. That's why they're popular figures on the national scale. Kamala Harris is starting to get to a point where she's doing quite well. When you take a look at Tim Walz, he's up 4 points nationally. The more people that know him, the more people that like him. Very different story than that of J.D. Vance, who's down 10 points nationwide and is actually underperforming that of Donald Trump when it comes down to the national average. Underperforming Donald Trump, who has been one of the most unpopular political figures in United States history, is certainly telling something. And it means that for this election, voters see Kamala Harris and Tim Walz very differently than they do that of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Much more similar to that of the 2020 election, when Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were in the positive direction, and Donald Trump and Mike Pence were in the negative direction, compared to 2016, which was a little bit different than this race, in that Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine were in the negative, when Donald Trump and and Mike Pence might also have been in the negative. Mike Pence was more so in the positive. But what we saw there was that was a lesser of two evils election. This does not feel like that. And Democrats are in a much better position, arguably, in terms of electoral power, in terms of fundraising strength, in terms of enthusiasm and excitement than they were even in 2020 and even 2016. And so looking at the Bloomberg Good Morning Consult numbers, I see data points that suggest that Kamala Harris is in a really good position. Is it an electoral college landslide? Absolutely not. But it means she's up in these battleground states. And according to them, she's up in 6 out of the 7 and tied in that remaining 7th. Phenomenal news for the Kamala Harris campaign, but ultimately, full steam ahead. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. Top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.